다음은 두 번째 발제자로서 이번 사진 비엔날레 예술감독을 맡으신 요시카와 나오야가 일본 젊은 세대들의 사진, 공모전과 교육 현장에서의 소감이라는 주제로 발제를 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 많은 관심 부탁드리겠습니다.
My name is Naoya Yoshikawa from Japan, the art director of the Daegu Photo Biennale 2016. I prepared already some data by PowerPoint, but we have some problem. But anyway, I will try to talk in English. But English is not my mother English, so right now, my stomach is shaking, so nervous. So anyway, I'll try. So I'm a Japanese photographer as well as an educator that has been working in the photography education for about 30 years. While working as an educator, I have done research about the photography education in Japan consistently and have held my position and held my post as the director of a photography education exhibition for more than 15 years. Coming from such experiments, I would like to share some of the episodes with you. I would really appreciate it if you could feel interested in the Japanese photography through my story. My research paper during graduate school was based on the theme of comparison between the photography education in Japan and the United States. In the research, we selected 100 photo educators, each from Japan and the United States, and analyzed the result from writing about 40 questions. It was a research aimed to identifying how much the photography education in Japan was lagging behind compared to the United States. So, however, it was difficult to compare between the structure of the photography education system in the United States with that of Japan. Since United States was ahead of Japan by more than a quarter of the century. In general, the Japanese society has a tendency to not lag behind the United States, as the United States became the role model for Japanese after World War II. Due to this, Japan has able to accomplish spectator economic development, but it was not appropriate to apply such disposition in the education sector. Hence, I try to realize the issue of the Japanese photography education during the time I was writing my thesis. Looking back at the time, I reflect that it was probably because I was only just influenced by outstandingness of the photography education in the United States. Nonetheless, I found some interesting points from the response I received from the question and answers for the report paper that I sent to each of the 100 photo educators in Japan and also the United States, with 200 in total. I requested to enclose the stamps envelopes for the reply mail so that it was anonymous, and from around 60% of the response from the United States, I received a lot of positive feedbacks that said, For example, I want to know the result after aggregation. So it would be wonderful if you could present it as a conference in the United States. And another, please come to visit our school once. But on the other hand, around 40% of the response from Japan were messages that showed unpleasantness, that said it is not polite to ask such question to the teaching staff. What is more interesting was the rate of response, even though it was a question and answers sent from Japan. The rate of response of United States was about 60%. Well, it was around 40% from Japan. Considering the fact that the response was to be made overseas, I expected the American photography educators to have low rates of response, but they actually European-related very activity, while the Japanese educators did not. Since the 20th century, the education system in Japan engaged in Japan engaged in carrying out 9 years long education, and started at the age of 6. And thus, Japan became a country with a high literacy rate that is very active towards higher education. However, despite in the fact that education at school needs to emphasize freedom and individuality, a lot of the school education were centralized along the teaching staff, which merely focused on teaching and learning, compared to the education for arts or music. That was more so in the case of photography education, especially since a majority of the systems was based on the functional education that aimed at skill aggregation. To explain how the photography education in Japan was formed, there was no apprenticeship system that engaged in the transfer of photography skills since the beginning of the 20th century. In general, the owner of a photo studio was called a teacher, not a boss. Young people that moved from local area to cities in order to learn photography skills and find a job stayed mostly at a photo studio, where they stayed to eat, sleep, and work. It was an education system where they had to start from the scratch and help with the household chores until they become the teacher's assistant later on. They could become independent only when the teacher acknowledges them as a professional worker. This was not only so in the photography businesses, but it was a very general system in all commercial businesses in Japan until a position of education system that resembled the Western countries. especially in the traditional arts and other artistic areas. There was a very natural system, and it is still continuing even today. Since the beginning of drastic economic development in Japan that began at the end of the 1960s, along with a rise in demand for photography in advertisement and commercial industries, the apprenticeship system at the photo studio could not foster among the labor force that the society required. As a result, there was a need for school education in the photography business. Since 1915, the Department of Photography was established at the Tokyo University of Arts for 10 years. But this was only to foster workers that were skilled in photography. Even now, the Department of Photography exists only in 4 years private university or colleges and 2 years colleges, not in national university. Nevertheless, there are lectures on photography that are held in national universities. Also, it seemed like the photography education in Japan has improved along with active photography education to private universities and special colleges. The reality was that they were mainly about acquiring skills. Indeed, there was education that also taught theories and knowledges, such as the history of photography, but the theory of photography mainly depending on the individual experiments and the judgment of the educator. So the detail did not handle any fundamental materials. An education that relies on the experiments of the educators, that their own discretion cannot be said to be universal. On the other hand, however, the photography education was practiced very actively in the form of arts and sculpture education without the need to have any separate photography lectures at the art university or college. Such education shaped itself to form its own history. For example, Kuwazawa Design School. Kuwazawa Design School, which opened in 1955 after Bauhaus, the design school in Germany, as you know, they established the Tokyo Zoukei University in 1966 and engaged in photography education. In addition, after Ernest Sato, the photojournalist, established a photo class for photography education at the Kyoto City University of Arts in 1968. It fostered many top photographers or artists such as Mr. Yasumasa Morimura. There were devised opinions as to what the photography education should be aimed for, but I hope photography can contribute to in the development of individuals as tools for communication and self-expression, rather than some that always try to teach something. I want to be someone that can share concerns, with other people and show it through my action, just like a companion at a marathon. Because every student has his or her own potentials in the line with their individuality. I would like to tell you an episode about a female student in Japan. She was a quiet student with a reserved personality, but I could not tell from my instincts that she had potentials. However, there were periods in which the abilities truly send out its bounds. It does not work out well merely, but watering its seeds every day. That student was clumsy in expressing oneself through words. Due to this, by the time that she was in her third year, she was left behind compared to the other students, because negligent about assignment submissions and began to dislike coming to school at all. I told her to bring your photo at home. So even if it is just one, to a cafeteria near the school by contacting her many times. In the end, she brought a couple of small photos that were more than twice as small as postcard. Moreover, they seemed to be like photographs that were all alike. So the outcome looked as if they were taken with repetitive shutter. Nevertheless, the student started laying out her photo on the table on the picture's sequence. It was deluded into thinking that she did such as arrangement or on purpose. And I told her, you have come up with a very interesting idea. Then, with the tapes that was in my hand, I began to stick the photo together, and it became the student's first series of my work. After that, the student started to attend school again and finished the school with the highest grade on the graduation work after becoming an outstanding student that everyone reversed. Since 1980s, there was a huge change in photography education in Japan. It was a student that came to study abroad in Japan from other Asian countries. It becomes legal to study abroad at own experiments in the 1980s, which brought many Korean students coming over to study at the universities and colleges in Japan. In a different perspective, it was the time period in which the young people in Korea began to go and study abroad in other places across the world. Especially in the case of Japan, there were a lot of Korean students that came to study in Japan since it was geographically Jews, and the culture and customs were quite similar. After studying photography at Japanese school, there were a lot of people that worked as an active photographer in Korea, and their stories are often highlighted. I will skip a little bit. Since the end of 20th century, museums in different parts of Japan began to treat photography work as an artwork. Such example are the Kawasaki University Museum, which is established in Kanagawa Prefecture in 1988, and the Tokyo Photographic Art Museum, which was opened in 1985. Moreover, in large cities such as Tokyo, galleries and engaged in selling photography also started to prepare. Such movement was interlaced with the list of commercial galleries and began sell photographs as an artwork gallery such as Tried Photo Salon by Mr. Ishihara and another galleries. I'll skip through. After Japan experienced a high rise in the economic development in the 1960s, people could see the pathway into the more abundant life. As well escaped from the publicity they experienced after the war. I will skip a little bit. We have no time, so. I'd like to introduce a little bit another episode. Actually, as I have been the director of a photography contest for young people called the Mio Photo Award that was launched in the 1998. The exhibition has been hosted every year up until 2015. Through that experiment, I will introduce the various phenomena that I saw and felt. First of all, around 1998, when the contest exhibition started, there were digital print or a color copy that were just beginning to be surprised. There was a lot of work due for an artist to use a photo as a materials for expression. And there were many modern photographers in Europe that were introduced one by one. Such trend posed a huge influence to the young generation in Japan. The works that entitled the contest exhibition began to actively challenge to the expression styles that destroyed the existing common sense of framed photographic paper. For example, mixed media work, which was the type of the three-dimensional work, and harmonized pictures and fragments of sculpture with photographs also began to be highlighted. Along with this, rather than using their contest focus on the society, photographed expression that focused on the perspective of oneself or the surrounding event of oneself. It can be said to be an expression that is not just a self-portrait, but something that feels more like thinking about along or today's SNS. Of course, such experiments were not limited to photos, and there were similar phenomena in novels or music industries of the works done by the younger generation. There would be several generations as to why, but I will leave that discussion to the experts, such as the photography, cities, or sociologists. However, it had a very contrasting feeling from the photographic expression of the young people of Germany from unification, and the Asian countries viewed the rapid change of the society. They were born in, raised in within hesitation. Yeah, we have some, right now we have so many contests. For example, the new Cosmos of photography in Canon, by Canon, and also UNA 21 by Nikon, and the other companies, so many contests. But almost for the young people to support their activities, to find new photographers, I mean young next generation artists. Finally, the young photographers of Japan are making their debut through the sum of systems, including school, exhibition contests, and galleries. In addition to this, there were the other wide range of tools for debut, such as event and photo presentations through website, including the Gene, which is a series of private published editions that started in the United States in the 1970s. And the comic market, maybe in Korea, comic world, they would not be limited only within Japan. Finally, I would like to make a suggestion for the photography of Asia. Last year, before working as the art director at this Biennale, I received a request to write a review for a book, which was a Japanese edition of the history of Korean photography, 1631 to 1945, written by Korean author named Injin 선생님, who has passed away, I didn't know, last month. There have been a lot of various such papers and specialized work, including a history of photography in Korea, just as in the case of Japan, but it would probably be published only Korean. In spite of the fact that there is handling many times different between Korea and Japan, and that it only takes 1 hour on a plane, but I believe that this book is the first specialized work of Korea related to photography that is translated to Japanese. In other words, it means that there is a first Korean book in photography in which the Japanese people can read in Japanese. After reading that book, I realized that there are so many facts written by Japan during the time of Japanese colony occupied it, that Japanese people were not aware of. Thus, I think that the history of photography cannot simply end just at one country's history of photography. Around 10 years ago, I was invited to a residence program in Italy once. The time I spent engaging in creative activities for 5 weeks with 8 other artists as artists in residence that were invited from different parts of the world was just like a dream. During this time, I encountered a photography collection that was published locally. I came to learn about activities of many Chinese modern or contemporary photographers. It was the same through a German photography magazine. Despite the fact that was a lot of intersections between the people, informed and logistic in the modern society through their experiences, I was very frustrated about not being able to learn about the difficult photography of Asia within Japan. Even though we are living in the same Asia countries, moreover, most of the history of photography that is taught in the photography education around the world focuses on contents, mainly around Europe, that starts from Niepce or daegu. Surely, however, there must be a history of photography in Asia as well. There have been photo biennales hosted in the city of Daegu in Korea for almost 10 years now. Here in Daegu, it be possible to create a platform for researching the Asian photography. In fact, we do not need any large budgets or buildings. If there were a place for people from other Asian countries who are really interested and eager to research can come to Daegu to present their study progress and share their opinions. I believe that researchers and experts from other parts of the world and Europe and the United States that were interested in learning about photography in Asia can come somewhere, for example, Daegu, the photography of Asia as well. I will the end of the story here by calling quite the Asian photography meeting our platform. Thank you so much.
네, 생각보다 제 발표가 좀 길어져가지고 우선 뭐 핵심은 일본의 젊은 사진가들에 대한 변화의 움직임과 또 아시아 사진에 대한 플랫폼으로서 아시아 사진 회의를 주창하시는 게 유지라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 다음에는 구스타프 헬베리가 이제 원래는 패널 디스커션이지만 본인의 이 탈주체적 의미구조의 사진에 대해서 한번 짧게 발표를 하시겠습니다. 감사합니다.